Pete's right. Today we're talking about probably one of my favourite subjects. And I reckon for some of us here at least, it's probably one of your favourite subjects too. And that's the subject of food. Who likes food? Whoa. Amen. You know, sometimes when I'm on Facebook, I don't know if you ever can relate to this, but you start watching those reels, you know, the videos, or if you're on Instagram, you watch the Instagram reels, and I get all these ones of like food, you're sticking a big steak on the barbecue, or you know, a roast thing of beef ribs, and just amazing. Always amazes me that it's always like meat that I see on my reels and never anything vegetarian. But anyway, maybe, I don't know, that's just coincidence, I think. But you know, food is something that is such an important part of our lives. And as Peter said, we are in the middle of a series that's called Bless. In 5 weeks, and the word bless is an acronym. And so we are up to the E, which is eat. And, you know, eating is something that really is so important in every life. It's one of the key functions that each of us do every day. If you eat within a normal schedule, you'll eat something like 1,097 meals in a week. Sorry, in a year, not a week. Wow. Wow. No, that's me. That's how you end up looking like me. No. 1,097 meals in a year. And that's, so it's something that we do time after time after time after time. And how we eat and how we can utilise food is such an important thing. You know, when you go through the Bible, the entire Bible, but today we're going to focus mainly on the Gospels, it's incredible how much food and eating and hospitality are actually a key part of what's going on. You know, we all know that Jesus said in John chapter 20, "Peace be with you, as the Father has sent me, I am sending you." So we know that Jesus has sent us. Just as the Father sent him, he's sending us. And we know why Jesus came to earth. If you don't know, Luke 19 verse 10, Jesus said, "For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost." We all know that. You know, as believers, we know that Jesus came to the lost. He came to save us. He came to restore us in a relationship with God. But do we know how he came? Because we're also told that in the book of Luke as well. If we go to Luke chapter 7, verse 34, and this is Jesus speaking again, and he said, "The Son of Man came eating and drinking. And you say, here is a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners." So Jesus came and he ministered by eating and drinking. He actually ate and drank so much with people who probably didn't belong in the synagogue or the temple that he got a reputation as a drunkard and a friend of sinners. Imagine, scandalous, being accused of being a friend of sinners. And you know, if you go through the Gospels, it's amazing how often the teachings that we know, because we all know the teachings of Jesus, we all know the parables of Jesus, we all know the stories that he told, we know the healings that he did. It's actually amazing how many of those involved food, how many of those actually involved a situation where they weren't in a church or their version of the church, the temple or the synagogue. Most of the interactions and most of the teachings of Jesus actually happened outside the synagogue, outside the temple. Of 42 recorded miracles in the Gospels, only 2 of them happened in the synagogue or in the temple. And so often, it actually involved food. Let's just do a really quick search through, and we're just going to go through the Gospel of John this morning. So in John chapter 2, the first recorded miracle of Jesus' ministry was the wedding feast of Cana, where Jesus turned water into wine. We'll talk more about that shortly. The next chapter, John chapter 3, when he went to the temple and he overturned the tables of the moneylenders and the exchange tables, that was actually during a feast. It was during the feast of Passover. So often the way even religious gatherings in Israel happened was around a feast. It was actually around food and drink. There was a whole range of feasts that the Jews would celebrate. The next chapter again, John chapter 4, Jesus met the Samaritan woman. He talked to the woman at the well. You probably again know the story. And after he spoke words of life into her, she then took him back to her Samaritan village. And it says, and he stayed there 2 days. He ate with them, he drank with them, he talked with them, he lived with Samaritans for 2 days. Now, we don't understand in our Western society how scandalous that was. Jews would actually avoid an entire region so that they wouldn't have to, not only would they not eat or drink with Samaritans, they didn't even want to see them or touch them. Even today, many Orthodox Jews, if they have to do business with Gentiles, or if they have to do business with people from those different areas around, that they even have a process where the money is passed through water so that it's cleansed before they touch the money that was touched by an unclean Gentile. Like it's such a big thing. And Jesus actually went in John chapter 4 and spent 2 days not only eating and drinking with Samaritan people, but living under their roofs, receiving hospitality from people who most Jews would not go anywhere near. Then the following chapter, John 5, Jesus healed the lame guy at the pool, where he couldn't get into the water, and Jesus raised him up and he healed him. He was actually on the way to Jerusalem for another one of the Jewish feasts. And in the following chapter, he feeds 5,000 men, plus women and children, so probably 10 or 15,000 people who he was teaching them out in the remote places. Again, you probably all know the story. They were hungry. He'd been teaching for hours. A little boy came up. He had a few loaves and a few fish, and Jesus used that to feed the entire multitude. He sat them down and everybody ate together. John chapter 7, he goes to the week-long Feast of Tabernacles in Jerusalem, and it says that it wasn't until halfway through the feast that he actually got up and started preaching in the temple courts. So the first half of that week, he went to Jerusalem to enjoy yet another feast, eating and drinking. John chapter 10, when the Jews picked up stones to stone Jesus, one of those couple of occasions that happened, that was again in the middle of the Feast of Dedication. See, feasts and eating and drinking and all of these things feature so many times. And when we often will read the teachings of Jesus and we'll remember what he said or remember the story that he said, but we don't realise how often this happened in this very normal situational background of people sharing a meal. In John chapter 11 and through to chapter 12, we talk a lot about Lazarus. When Lazarus he died and then Jesus raised him from the death. Lazarus and his family were a family that Jesus would often go and dine with and would have meals with. And actually in chapter 12, just as Jesus is coming into the feast of Passover in Jerusalem, Lazarus actually holds a feast in Jesus' honour. And so all the way through, we just keep seeing this same theme over and over again. Then, of course, John chapter 13, the Last Supper. That was part of the Feast of Passover, and it was a meal. They shared a meal together. Communion, which Natasha just shared with us, was actually in the context originally of a meal. In the early church, communion was in a meal. And the church fathers actually, I think Paul actually spoke to the Corinthians about it because they weren't actually showing proper hospitality in that context. Some were coming in there and gorging themselves and being gluttons, while others couldn't afford as much and went without. And so this whole context of communion in the early church was meant to be over a shared meal. It was an opportunity for people to actually show love. It was an opportunity for people to engage together. And then John chapter 21, after Jesus died, he rose again. He then goes and meets with the disciples. Peter had led a few of them to go back out and go fishing because they were all lost and didn't know what to do. And they see Jesus on the shore, and Jesus has actually prepared a meal for them. So this is early in the morning. Jesus had already, like it said, that he was sitting there and fish on the barbecue. He had the breakfast ready for them. Now, sure, he was God. He could have just snapped his fingers and it all appeared, but I don't think that was Jesus' style. So he's obviously gone out very early in the morning. He's gone to a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of preparation, so that he would have a meal ready for his apostles. This is the risen Jesus Christ after he rose from the dead. So all the way through, and that's just John. You can look at any of the Gospels and you just see this. So many things happen in the context of a meal. So many things happen in the context of a situation of hospitality. When Jesus called Matthew, we were actually watching The Chosen last night, and if you haven't seen The Chosen, it's a really great. There's some creative license in it, but it's completely consistent with Scripture, and you just get to see some of these stories that you read about in the Gospels and maybe just read over sometimes. But we were watching The Chosen, and it was where Jesus called Matthew. When he called Matthew, the tax collector, the first thing Matthew did was he went and he held a banquet, a meal, a feast to honour Jesus. When Jesus met Zacchaeus up in the tree, Jesus called him down and said, I need to have a feast and I need to have a meal at your place today. You need to basically host me. That whole story with Zacchaeus is quite profound. We had a message on it back in August last year. The message was called Jesus the Returning King. If you ever want to know more about the Zacchaeus story and just the incredible truths behind what Jesus did there, go back on our Spotify and have a listen to that message. But in the Zacchaeus story, through this encounter with Jesus, which was really just Jesus coming and saying to Zacchaeus, I want to eat at your place today, the entire social fabric of a city was overturned. The biggest injustice that was occurring in the city at that time was fully overturned because of a meal, because of an encounter with Jesus. That's the power of food. That's the power of a meal. That's the power of hospitality. So many of Jesus' parables, in Luke 15, we've got the 3 parables in a row, the lost coin, the lost sheep, and then the lost son, otherwise known as the prodigal son. In all 3 of the stories, as soon as what was lost was found, the response was, let's have a feast, let's have a party. God, I reckon, enjoys partying and feasting and celebrating and rejoicing far more than many Christians do. As a matter of fact, if you go right through the whole Bible, we're not going to do that today, but right at the very beginning, you look at this picture of creation. Genesis 1 and 2. We've all read that creation story. We've all read that story of Adam and Eve, and where God made this incredible garden, and it had 4 rivers watering, and it was a picture of abundance. Every possible thing you could imagine, this picture of abundance in the garden. And he places Adam and Eve there, and he says, don't eat from this tree because it's not good for you. Remember that story, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? For a lot of my life when I read that story, that was the thing that jumped out at me, was about but you don't eat from this tree, don't eat this fruit. And that's the focus and that's the emphasis that so often we put on the story. But have you ever stopped to think that God created this incredible garden that had everything in it, that had everything that they needed in abundance? It wasn't just about supply, it wasn't just about functionality. The very diversity in creation shows a God of abundance. At every level of creation, if you can study anything of biology, anything of studying plants and animals and all sorts of things, and the diversity and the abundance that is everywhere you look is quite incredible. And God created all of this for Adam and Eve. He said, here, this is yours. And his command to them, be fruitful and multiply. This is the heart of God. The heart of God is abundance. The heart of God is for you to actually be fruitful. It's for you to be blessed. It's for you to thrive. It's for you to live abundantly. Sometimes we almost think that going without is a virtue, or sometimes we think that lack is a virtue. And if I'm really following Jesus, no, I can't go and enjoy that. I can't go and have a nice $50 steak. That's such waste. It's frivolous. How could you do that? But God is a God of abundance. And God is a God who actually wants for us to reach out to each other in abundance and in generosity and with hospitality. Hospitality is one of the key themes right throughout Scripture. All the way through the Old Testament, hospitality is so important that people do some crazy things in the name of hospitality. Because culturally, in the Middle East, it's such an important thing, and in many other cultures around the world as well. The New Testament church knew a lot about hospitality, and some of the teachings in the New Testament actually encourage us to be hospitable. So Romans 12, for example, 9 to 13. Paul says, love must be sincere. Hate what is evil, cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honour one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervour, serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Part of love, part of serving, Part of showing, as Paul says, love must be sincere. Part of that is practicing hospitality. Peter says the same thing in 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 7 to 11. He actually says the end of all things is near. Therefore, so everything that follows, he's saying, therefore you've got to do this stuff because the end is near. Time is short. So therefore, be alert and of sober mind so that you may pray. Above all, love each other deeply because love covers over a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. How often have you heard that verse, love each other deeply because love covers a multitude of sins? You always hear that just as a standalone verse, don't you? And it's immediately followed with show each other hospitality. In the same breath, Peter is putting hospitality with love. And if you genuinely love, and if you show love, and if your love is sincere, it covers a multitude of sins. You know, hospitality is so much the heart of God. As a matter of fact, God sent his Son into the world that we'd be restored to him. That's a picture of hospitality, somebody reaching out and receiving somebody into their own world, into their own domain. That is what hospitality is. And the very fact that God so relentlessly pursues, he pursues because he wants relationship. He wants relationship with every one of us. I just want to maybe mess with some of our religious sensibilities this morning. And I'm going to share two passages back to back out of the Gospel of John. And I want to unpack that a little bit to try and help us understand what I'm talking about. And when we read the Gospels, each Gospel writer had a different purpose. And each Gospel writer wrote in a certain way for that purpose. So they're not just four stories beginning to end about what happened in Jesus' life. You need to understand that. Because otherwise, that's where people read them and say, oh, they're not even consistent. This one says that happened first, and this one... The writing style of the time wasn't just to tell you a chronological narrative. Each writer chose certain stories, chose certain pictures, chose certain teachings, and put them together for a particular cause and a particular purpose. And so in John, I'm going to read two passages, and then we're going to talk about each of those. They're both from John chapter 2. So John chapter 2, verse 1 to 11. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, they've got no more wine. Woman, why do you involve me? Jesus said, my hour has not yet come. His mother said to the servants, do whatever he says. Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding 20 to 30 gallons. So that's 80 to 120 litres times 6. Jesus said to the servants, fill the jars with water, so they filled them to the brim. And then he told them, now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet. They did so. And the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realise where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you've saved the best till now. What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. So that's story one. So paraphrase, got a wedding, everyone had too much to drink, they all started getting drunk because the wine was out. Now bear in mind, for a family in the first century of Israel, the wedding was actually the number one, the biggest social event this family would ever be responsible for. How that wedding goes, how that ceremony and that reception and all of those things, as in using our terminology, how that whole celebration went would determine that family's standing in the town for a generation to come. It was an incredibly important event, far more important than it is in our society. Everyone drank too much, they were partying, they were celebrating. Mary told Jesus, as if to say, Jesus, what are you going to do about it? And he said, hey, it's not my time. And she told them to basically listen to what he said, and he, as we know, he turned the water into wine. So that was the first way John says, first of the signs through which he revealed his glory. To hold on to that. So immediately afterwards, the next verse, verse 12, after this he went to Capernaum with his mother and brothers and disciples. There they stayed for a few days. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts he found people selling cattle, sheep and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, "Get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a market." His disciples remembered that it is written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." Now, if we stop to think about these two pictures for a moment, they actually mess with a whole lot of our religious sensibilities. Because here we see two pictures. We see a wedding where everyone's getting drunk. And then we see a church service. Let's put it in today's vernacular. We see a religious encounter where people are coming to worship God. And so Jesus, in this first situation, when there's a wedding, when everyone's getting drunk, he actually does something that blows many people's minds. I've heard all sorts of semantic gymnastics in sermons to try and say, oh, it's not alcoholic wine, or it's this, or it's that, or it's whatever. It's not correct. Even the master of ceremony says, hey, usually you serve the best wine, and when everyone gets too drunk to know what they're drinking, that's where you bring out the poor stuff. So Jesus, in this situation where, let's put our religious hats on for a moment, people are doing the wrong thing. They're getting drunk. They're drinking too much. Now, let's be clear. Jesus is not saying drunkenness is okay. Jesus is not for a moment making a comment about drunkenness here. There were far more important things in that moment that were going on that Jesus was speaking into. And then we have this picture of people just coming in the normal religious system to worship God at the temple. In the same way, we can compare that to, say, us coming here on a Sunday morning for church within the cultural context. And Jesus was so offended at what he saw in the temple that he actually overturned the whole thing. Now, wouldn't you think that Jesus going to a drunken wedding reception, where he'd start throwing out the judgments and overturning the tables and tipping the wine out and saying, "Stop getting drunk"? But his offence was actually at a religious system that subjugated people, a religious system that ripped people off in the name of worship. Now, Jesus was not for a moment saying, hey, that's all good, let's go and get drunk. But that family was facing a catastrophic situation. Now, I can guarantee you that family would have provided enough wine. If they had to go into debt, if they had to go into servitude for years afterwards to make sure that wedding was catered for properly, they would have done that. And this family's, the consequence for this family, and they were obviously close to Mary because Mary knew what was going on behind the scenes, and she actually compelled Jesus to do something even though it wasn't his time. So Jesus actually changed the timing of the start of his ministry to address the situation that was happening at this wedding. It was very, very important. Now, there's a whole message in that. But I guess the picture that John's painting, these two pictures, he's painting a Jesus that's very different from maybe the Jesus we assume he is. And he's certainly painting a very different picture of Jesus than what our religious sensibilities would want us to think. Because how often in that first story would our focus be on how much have people been drinking? Now, people were celebrating. Jesus did something incredibly compassionate and incredibly merciful for a family whose entire future was going to be irrevocably changed if they were known as the family who ran out of wine at a wedding reception. Now, bear in mind, wedding receptions there were 7-day events. They weren't just everyone goes to the club for 3 hours and has a bit of a meal. It was a multi-day event, and it was one of the biggest celebrations. But this first miracle took place in a situation where Jesus chose hospitality. Jesus chose to give and to bless and to address a very, very real issue for this family in that moment in a way that offends many religious people. just like he offended many religious people for the next 3 years, and they eventually drove him to the cross. You know, because Jesus, what's important to Jesus, there are things that are important to him far more than what you do, in the sense of, do you behave properly? Do you behave in accordance with the rules? Do you obey all the rules and whatnot? It's about the heart. And what he saw in that very next picture of the temple, he had no problem with worship of God. But there was an entire system that had been set up where people that came to worship God were ripped off. And the people that ran the temple at the time, they would say, well, no, you can't give your money to God because your money's dirty, so you've got to buy temple money, and it's a 10-to-1 exchange. So if you want to give God, and under the law, you have to give God a certain percentage of your income as the tithe, and then you're getting ripped off by people who have set up an entire structure to profit off your worship. And that's why Jesus got upset. And don't for a moment think Jesus just had a temper tantrum. I've heard that story used to justify, Jesus lost his temper too. He didn't have a temper tantrum. Jesus stood there watching what was going on, and he made a whip. It would have taken 20 or 30 minutes. He didn't just fly off the handle and start throwing tables over, and like that's a picture sometimes we get. He made a whip. The reason he made a whip was actually to release the animals. The tables he overturned were the tables that contained the money that was ripping people off. So he didn't just go crazy and start destroying the church. It was a very deliberate thing that he did. And then immediately after that, in the next chapter, was when he met the woman of Samaria and went and stayed with the Samaritans for 2 days. Fancy, as a Jew, seeing Jesus act in this way. At the wedding feast, then at the temple, where all of his anger was directed, and then go off and stay under a Samaritan's roof for 2 days. This is a very different Jesus to what sometimes we think. So where does hospitality fit within all of this? I just want to talk for a few minutes about what is hospitality. We hear the term a lot. We hear there's a whole industry, a hospitality industry. What does hospitality mean? What is this issue that we're talking about? Because in this series called Blessed, this is how to live as a blessing to others, how to live so that your life will draw people to Jesus rather than drive them away from Jesus. And I wonder if sometimes, if the way we act, let's say I was at that wedding, and let's say I was looking around and seeing everyone have a couple too many, and sitting there and judging them, looking down my nose at them. Because that's what the Pharisees would do. Jesus even got a reputation of being a drunkard, even though we know he was never drunk, because he never sinned, the Bible tells us. So just the fact that he was there in the same place as people who were doing the wrong thing, he got a reputation for that. Because that's what a religious spirit does. A religious spirit looks at everybody around and judges what they do, and puts them down and puts yourself on this higher level. Oh, I would never do that. That's what a religious spirit does. But Jesus was far more interested in the heart. So hospitality is the art of making someone feel welcome, comfortable, and valued. It's a lot more than just having someone over for a feed, but that is part of it. Hospitality, when we welcome someone into our space, into our home, we're not just offering a physical sanctuary, but we're also extending an emotional sanctuary to that person. We express our trust in them by allowing them into our personal space and showing them respect because we're ensuring their comfort and their well-being. It's an act of kindness and consideration which sends a powerful message, strengthening bonds and establishing a solid foundation for a lasting relationship. See, what Jesus did at the wedding wasn't a statement on drunkenness. It was an act of kindness to a family who was in a desperate situation. And it was an act of obedience to his mother. Hospitality is a way of showing love in a very unique and powerful way. Because you're inviting somebody into what is a private part of your life. You invite someone into your home. That's your sanctuary. That's your place. That's where you can take off the mask, take off the work mask or the church mask or whatever mask you wear, and you can just be you. And you're inviting somebody into that space. And it's a very powerful thing, and it's a very vulnerable thing, but it gives you a real opportunity to build relationship, to build trust, and to deepen in a way that you're never going to get in a church setting like this. You know, the fact that Jesus was actually at that party with his apostles, the fact that he went to a wedding feast, he was about to start his ministry. Oh, don't you know, I've got more important things to do. I've got to get out there and preach the gospel. But he took the time after time after time after time, to actually engage with people around a feast or around a party, and he even allowed people to have parties in his honour. And I can guarantee you he wasn't the one sitting there with a sour face looking at what everyone was drinking. I reckon he actually would have been, he would have been like the life of the party, in the sense of he would have been engaging, he would have been reaching out to people, he would have been trying to take that moment to just get to know people. I reckon that he would have been so easy to talk to. Like, even when the kids were brought to him, he just wanted to sit them on his lap. He had this way of drawing people to him. Have you ever been in a food and beverage setting, like a hospitality setting? And there are some people that you really like going out with because they're really engaging and you really enjoy spending time. And there are other people that are really hard work. You know, we've all got that in our lives. I reckon Jesus would have been one of those really engaging people. And time after time we see that. But see, hospitality requires a certain degree of vulnerability as well. By opening your home and personal space to others, you expose yourself and your life to that person. This act of vulnerability can be quite powerful. It allows others to see us in our authentic state. And it fosters an environment of honesty and transparency. Because when you start opening your home to somebody, when you start opening yourself to somebody, sitting across, having a conversation over a meal, it's amazing how often things go deep. Many, many years ago, I was a chef, well, just many years, when I was 19, 20. And during that time, there used to be this ministry thing that happened all over Australia called Beach Mission. Has anyone ever heard of Beach Mission? They happen all around, probably not so much in Alice Springs because there's not too many beaches, but anyway, so all around where there are beaches, there was this thing called Beach Mission. And what it would usually be would be a group of maybe 20 or 30 or 40 people that would go to perhaps a caravan park or a beachside town or something like that, and they'd run essentially a holiday program for the kids and the youth, and so it was just a great time. So I was asked to go onto a beach mission because the person that was going to cook for them had fallen sick and they had no cook. And I said, yeah, well, sure, why not? And it was a 12-day program. We had 40 people, and basically my job was to cook for them all, breakfast, lunch and dinner, which was fun. It was great. And so as part of that beach mission, throughout on any given day, one of them might come and help. They'd be on peeling potatoes or helping wash up, or, we had 2 or 3 people just to help out in the kitchen, which was really just a big tent. We had a big tent for the kitchen and everybody slept in other tents. And in that period of 12 or however many days, every one of those 40 people spent time with me in the kitchen, sitting across the table, peeling potatoes, peeling whatever, prepping the food for the next meal. And every single one of them actually opened up and essentially told me their life story. And we had some really powerful conversations, really powerful encounters. I was amazed. I was like 19. What are you telling me this for? But there was so many powerful encounters just sitting around in the kitchen preparing food. Matter of fact, the leader of the beach mission, she was meant to be the counsellor and everybody was meant to come to her and whatnot, and she got a bit upset with me because she said, you shouldn't be talking to these people, you should be sending them to me. And back then I was a little bit less mature than I am now, and my response was probably a bit less mature as well. I just said, well, if they wanted to go to you, they would. And but that aside, what astounded me, because it was the first time I'd really seen it, was the power of the kitchen, I call it. The power of the kitchen. You have a moment with somebody where they're going to open up in a way that they never will sitting in a row here at church or even out there afterwards. We have these opportunities to speak into people's lives and to receive from people through hospitality. It's an incredibly powerful thing. Because you see, hospitality shows someone that you want to get to know them better and that you want them to feel comfortable. That's what hospitality is all about. It's not just about having a meal with someone. That's part of it. Hospitality is a much broader thing. It's a mindset and it's a positioning of your heart towards someone. It's an excellent way to build and cultivate relationships. It helps you to see and hear a different perspective, because as you sit there talking to somebody and you hear their story and you hear their views on things, I've often found over a meal, I'm amazed at the things that I learn and hear, and even when I go away and ponder that stuff, it's like, wow, I never thought about that before. And so it's an opportunity for me to learn from others too. Most of the things I've learned in my life about cultures, about people, about all sorts of things have actually been in conversations over meals. Most of the close friendships and relationships I've built in life have actually been built over meals, not over going to church together. See, hospitality also reminds you of what you've got to offer. Because sometimes we can start to develop a consumer mindset where it's all about me and my needs and my wants, but when I actually put myself out there for someone else and I'm able to just do something in their life, show them that I love them, show them, just show them a bit of us and take that time with them. That's where you start to really understand how powerful your story is. It amazes me sometimes when I tell my story and people are really impacted by that. And just like when they tell me their story and that impacts me, this is the power of hospitality. Helps you to build a genuine support network, helps to foster a sense of belonging and trust, all through hospitality. And it tells someone that they're important. Anyone can just come up, shake hands, "G'day mate, how you going?" Even just go out there and get someone a coffee, that's fine. But, if I say, "Hey, why don't you come and have lunch with me?" I'm actually telling you that I want to spend time with you. I'm telling you that you're important in my life. It gives an opportunity to go deeper. And it's actually quite easy. It's quite easy. I've always found it difficult. You know how you get some people that are evangelists and you've got to go out and speak on the street corner and preach Jesus. I've actually never been comfortable with that personally, just for me. Not saying what anybody else needs to be focused on, but for me, I find it's a lot easier to share my faith in the context of a relationship that is built through meals, through getting together, through hospitality, through just those encounters. Sometimes we might get a little bit concerned about, but I can't afford to have people over. I can't, it's so expensive. Or it doesn't have to be an expensive meal. And one of the things that has made me sad over the years is a number of people have heard that, Dave used to be a chef. I could never cook for him because his standards are going to be so high. I can tell you, I've got the lowest standards of anybody you'll ever meet. Just throw a sausage on the barbie, I'm happy. Seriously. It doesn't have to be about what you cook. Now, I love making nice food and I love seeing people enjoy that food, but we often just have somebody over and just have something easy. Throw a steak on the barbie and a bit of salad that we bought from Woolies. It's not about having to perform. It's not about having to create a certain meal or spend a certain amount of money. You can be hospitable without a whole lot of cost. Because it's not about the dollars you spend. It's actually about the heart that you show. Because you can also be quite stingy. And you can show this attitude of stinginess to somebody, and that also sends a strong message. Hospitality is far more about your openness and your generosity, regardless of cost. And I don't just mean, go overboard. I mean, you can do a really cheap, really nice meal for $10 or $15 for half a dozen people. It's not about cost. Never get caught up in, but my house is a mess. Mate, my house is not as good as somebody else's. I don't have this, I don't have that. We get embarrassed about our situation, so to the point that we never want to have anybody over. People aren't coming over to judge your house. They're not even coming over to judge your food. They love the fact that you've invited them. They're actually there to see you. So when you're displaying hospitality or practicing hospitality, don't get caught up in, let's spend the whole night in the kitchen just making everything perfect so it's like this 3-course dinner party that everyone's going to rave about forever. It's actually about connection. Connect with them. So don't worry if your home's not spotless. Mine's not either. And all you do is just shove it all in the main bedroom and close the door. Hey, here's my secret. But you know, when I was reading up about hospitality online, I read this really interesting definition of hospitality. And I wanted to read it to you because I think it's really pertinent. It said this, it said, hospitality has the power to convert an unfamiliar setting into a place that feels like home, a place where one's unique identity is acknowledged and valued. It has the potential to change the narrative from you are a visitor here to you belong here. And this shift is profound. It fosters a sense of security and acceptance, allowing individuals to be their authentic selves without fear of judgment. You know, church, we've got this really big sign outside the church on that side. It says, you belong here. I know our sister church and Hope Centre has you belong here as well. In order for somebody to not feel like a visitor here, but that they belong here, the difference is a heart of hospitality. Will you reach out to someone? And I'm not just talking in a church context. So by all means, invite someone after church, go and take someone out for lunch. That's fantastic. But I'm also talking about, have you ever had a meal with your neighbours? Have you ever had a meal with your work colleagues? Have you ever reached out to somebody out there in the community? Because statistically, if you invited 100 people from this community to come to church, 99 will say no. But I'll guarantee you, if you invited anybody you know to have a meal with you, it'll be rare that someone ever says no. Because people love when you reach out of yourself and just sit across the table from someone, get to know them. And I can tell you from my own experience that evangelism that way is far more effective and far more powerful than getting out on a street corner and telling them they're going to hell. And it's also far more consistent with the way Jesus ministered. Because he came to seek and save the lost, but he came eating and drinking. He came to connect with people. He connected with people so often that the religious people said, oh, you're drunk and you're a sinner. You're down the pub all the time with all the drunks. In today's vernacular. For Jesus, it wasn't about going out and getting drunk. He never did. Because he had his own internal standard that he lived by. But he was out there with people who were broken and hurting and in all sorts of situations, and he loved them and he reached out to them. Sinners were drawn to him. You look at every encounter he had with a sinner, they were drawn to him. Even the guy that was full of demons, living among the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he didn't run away. In that moment, he ran to Jesus and knelt. Everyone was drawn to Jesus because they're drawn to a heart that is open. And that's the heart of hospitality. And if you've ever felt maybe not qualified to go out there and preach or to evangelise or to do any of those things, make someone a meal. And don't just make it, sit there and have it with them. Share a meal with someone. And I'll tell you now, you will transform lives just with that one step. Hospitality, food, there is such power in hospitality. There is such power in reaching out and bringing somebody into your life for that moment, bringing somebody into your domain, into your home, becoming vulnerable. Just getting to know them. And it's something that every one of us can do. One of the things that I hate is when I was talking before about Facebook Reels. Sometimes you're watching those Reels or whatever and you see all of these so-called influencers who they set something up where they go out to somebody on the street and they give them a meal and it's all recorded and they record the reaction, all that stuff. You've probably seen a few of them. Or they go into a restaurant and they give a waitress a $1,000 tip and it's all crafted for, look at how this makes me look. That's not hospitality. That's not reaching out to someone. So I encourage you, as you are hospitable, as you bring people into your life, as you bring them into your heart, don't make it about you. Don't make it about the quality of the food you're offering. Don't make it about all these things that will become barriers to relationship. Just invite them in. Just invite them in and, just make a spaghetti bowl if you like. It doesn't matter what you make. Sit there and connect heart to heart with people, and you will change lives. And they may not even ever remember what you say, but they'll remember how they felt when you invited them in. And there is incredible power in hospitality, and it's far more consistent with the heart of Jesus than being that religious voice that tells them what they should and shouldn't do. And if you read the Gospels, you'll see time and time again, Jesus upset that narrative. He shook up the religious sensibilities in order to reach the Zacchaeuses of the world, in order to reach the Samaritan woman who was living a scandalous life, even aside from being a Samaritan. They were the ones that he went for. They were the ones that he reached. And he just did it through reaching out. So I just want to encourage, we're going to have a moment of prayer. And I want to give an opportunity for, first of all, anybody who, if you've never actually given your heart to Jesus, if you've never decided that you want to live for God, I just want to give you a moment today because God wants you as well. He wants you in his life, and he wants to be in your life. Just like we're talking about being hospitable with other people and bringing them in, God did everything to the point of giving his own life so that you could be part of his story, so that you could actually be part of his world. And so that's the call that he has for you. And I just want to take a moment. So let's all close our eyes for a moment. And if there is anybody today who, you've never made that decision to follow God, or maybe you made that decision a long time ago, but you know that you've walked away from it, or it's been too long since you've actually lived for him and with him. If I just ask you to raise your hand now, and we'd love to pray with you and for you. And I also want to pray for everybody that's here today. Wherever we are with God, wherever we are in our Christian walk, in our faith, there is an opportunity for us to discover the power of hospitality to be able to pour into the lives of those around us. And I just want to pray for us all. So let's just keep our eyes closed for a minute. I'm just going to pray for you all. Lord God, we thank you that you are a God whose heart is to reach out. Lord, that you are a God who pursues relationship. That you're a God who is the ultimate in hospitality, the ultimate who would reach out to us and draw us to you and bring us into your space, Lord, because you care about our heart. And Father, I thank you that you've given us so many examples through Jesus' life in the Gospels of the power of food and drink, the power of getting together and connecting with people over something that's a normal activity. Lord, I pray that you would show us how we can use this normal activity that we do more than 1,000 times a year as a deliberate attempt to sow into somebody's life. Lord, that we would intentionally go looking for opportunities for our very eating and drinking to be used for the kingdom, Lord, that we could bless people, that we could live as a blessing, that we could pour out into the lives of those around us, that we could reach to them, Lord. Lord, we have a society that is so starving for relationship, that's so starving for community. And Lord, we have an opportunity, every one of us. Lord, I pray that you would just give us a burning in our heart for those around us, for those here in this church, Lord, for those that are outside in the community, for our neighbours, for our workmates, for our family members, for everybody around us who will probably never walk through the door of this church if we asked them to, but who would very happily walk into my lounge room if I invited them for a meal. Lord, I pray that we would see the opportunity to reach hearts and lives just through the simple act of hospitality, Father. And I pray that as we start to discover that our lives would never be the same, Lord, that we would each have the opportunity to bring your kingdom into the lives of people who maybe are far from your kingdom, just through reaching out and loving in the way that you did. And Lord, I pray that we would never again be mistaken into thinking that it's all about religious services and ceremonies and all of that good stuff. But Lord, it's actually about connecting with people. And we have that opportunity every day. Father, may we as a church reach our community just through those little acts of service, acts of hospitality, acts of opening our heart and our home to people around us, Father. I pray that would transform our lives and our city. In Jesus' name.